Most bands fall apart because someone cheats someone. Money, affairs, credit stolen in the night. The Cars fell apart because the man who built them was too good at his job. He wrote every hit. He controlled every studio session. He turned down his best friend's songs, the man whose voice had sung their biggest record to 1.5 billion people, and told him they weren't good enough for the band. He watched the system he'd designed slowly strangle the partnership that made it run. And then, 23 years after the breakup, he called the survivors back together. But the voice was already gone. This is the Ric Ocasek problem. The Cars couldn't survive. Before we start, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. By 1987, the Cars had everything. 6 albums, a decade of hits, Just What I Needed, Shake It Up, You Might Think, Drive, an MTV presence so dominant their videos practically invented the format, a Grammy-nominated album that hit number 3 on the Billboard chart. The arenas were still full. The records were still selling, but inside the band, a war had already been fought and lost, quietly, without a single press release. The real story was this. Ric Ocasek had built the Cars around one principle: his songs, his vision, his rules. For a decade, that principle worked brilliantly. Until the man standing next to him every night decided he deserved more than the system would allow. The thing that saved them was destroying them, and nobody watching from the outside could see it coming, because the music never showed the cracks. That was the cruelest part. Cleveland, Ohio, early 1960s. A lanky, angular kid from Baltimore has already changed his surname from Ocasek to Ocasek because it sounds better on a marquee. That instinct alone tells you everything about how his mind works. He is not yet in a successful band. He is already thinking about what the band will look like from the audience. Ocasek played guitar. He wrote songs, not casually, obsessively, with the focused intensity of someone who understood from the beginning that songwriting wasn't the hobby. That was the whole point. In Cleveland, he met Benjamin Orr. Orr was everything Ocasek wasn't. Where Ocasek was cool in a slightly alien way, like he was observing the room from a small distance, the way David Bowie could make you feel he'd arrived from somewhere you hadn't been, Orr was warm, magnetic, conventionally handsome in a way that made crowds respond before he played a note. His voice was powerful and emotive, a rock instrument in the best possible sense, the kind of voice that makes a song feel urgent. Think of them as the Lennon-McCartney of New Wave. Ocasek was Lennon, the writer, the architect, the one whose personality shaped the blueprint. Orr was McCartney, the voice the public fell in love with, the one whose presence made the blueprint feel human. Neither worked without the other. They played together for nearly a decade before the Cars existed. Different groups, same dream, neither quite finding it. Then they moved to Boston. And in Boston, in 1976, the pieces finally came together. Elliot Easton, on lead guitar, melodic, precise, the kind of player whose solos sound composed even when improvised. The guitarist who makes other guitarists quietly furious. Greg Hawkes on keyboards, the sonic architect in execution, translating Ocasek's vision into the layered, electronic arrangements that would define the Cars' studio sound. David Robinson on drums, the man who actually named the band, having previously played in a group called the Cars. Steady, unshowy, the foundation that let the more expressive elements stay airborne. 5 people, 1 city, a decade of preparation, and one man who already knew exactly how this was going to run. Ocasek and Orr had been partners for nearly 10 years before the first album. 10 years of shared rent, shared disappointment, and the specific bond that forms between two people who keep choosing the dream over every practical alternative. Think of Mick Jagger and Keith Richards living together in that Edith Grove flat in 1962. Broke, rehearsing in the cold, eating badly, completely certain they were going to make it. That's the texture of this partnership. Not glamorous, formative. Easton, Hawkes, and Robinson brought their own years of development. The full band had something almost no debut act has: genuine musical maturity across every position. No weak links, no passenger. Together they had a sound that was simultaneously radio-friendly and genuinely strange. Like Blondie, another band of that era that made commercial accessibility feel slightly dangerous. that put a hook in your head that also made you feel vaguely uneasy. The Cars had the same quality. Pop music built on a slightly alien architecture. They believed they were unstoppable. They were right. They just didn't know the cost yet. 1977. The Cars recorded a demo of Just What I Needed. Boston radio picks it up, not as a curiosity, but as a phenomenon. Elektra Records signs them. The debut album, 1978, arrives fully formed. This is not a band finding itself on record. This is a band that already knows exactly who it is, which almost never happens on a first album. Just What I Needed, My Best Friend's Girl, Good Times Roll. 3 songs that could each have anchored another band's entire career. Grammy nomination, Best New Artist, 21st Ceremony. They lose to Taste of Honey, one of those decisions music history quietly files under Noted and Moved On. Then Candio, Panorama, Shake It Up, and their first top 10 Billboard single. The hits arrived like clockwork. The crowds grew. The money followed. The future seemed limitless, but cracks had already started to form. Invisible from the front of the stage, impossible to ignore from behind it. Here is the thing about Ric Ocasek that he never tried to hide. He said it himself, in plain language, on record. He was controlling. He had never really joined someone else's band. He considered himself the first member of every group he created, and he expected those groups to perform his songs. He wasn't running a democracy, he was building a vehicle for a specific vision, and the vehicle required other people to operate it. At first, this was invisible in the results. The songs were undeniable. The arrangements were extraordinary. The commercial performance was spectacular, but the royalty statements told a different story. In rock music, the songwriter earns twice, once for performing, again every time the song is licensed, sold, or played. The performers who aren't writing earn only once. Across 6 albums and a decade of major hit songs, that gap compounds into something significant, not just financially, but psychologically. This is the same structure that eventually fractured the Kinks, Ray Davies writing everything, while Dave Davies played guitar parts the world adored, the credit and the recognition flowing in one direction while the labor flowed in both. Or think of the early Eagles, where Glenn Frey and Don Henley's songwriting dominance created a 2-tier system that other members never quite accepted. The pattern is consistent. When one person controls the writing in a band, the fault line is already there. Success just widens it. Ocasek also increasingly didn't enjoy touring. His songwriting income gave him a financial cushion the road couldn't provide. For Orr, the opposite was true. He was a live performer, electrifying on stage, the face crowds responded to first. The road was where he was most himself. 2 men, same band, completely different relationships to what the band owed them. Then people started talking. Stage 1. The imbalance exists but stays invisible. The early albums sell. Everyone earns. The gap between Ocasek's songwriting income and everyone else's performance income exists. But the overall numbers are large enough that it doesn't feel urgent. Not yet. At first, nobody notices. Stage 2. Success makes the gap structural. Shake It Up hits the top 10. The band goes mainstream. More sales means more royalties, which means more separation. Ocasek's studio authority grows with his commercial track record. He now has data on his side. Stage 3. Orr wants more. He has been writing songs developed with his girlfriend, material he believes belongs on a Cars album. He is, after all, the band's co-lead vocalist. He brings the songs to Ocasek. Ocasek listens and says no. His explanation: the songs are not the Cars. They don't fit the architecture. Soon it was impossible to ignore what that meant. Stage 4. The rejection metastasizes. The songs Ocasek turned down appear instead on Orr's solo album The Lace, 1986. The message Orr receives is not complicated. You are the voice of this band, not the mind of it. You perform the vision. You don't shape it. This is the same wound that drove Pete Best out of the Beatles before they were famous. The sense that the inner circle has been defined, the door has been decided, and you are on the outside of it regardless of your contribution. Except Orr wasn't pushed out of the band. He was kept in it, on those terms, for 2 more years. Stage 5, Door to Door, 1987. The album that emerges from this atmosphere is the band's least successful record since they found their footing. The spark has dimmed, the internal atmosphere has curdled, and then something happened that changed everything. The conversation where Ocasek told Orr his songs didn't fit probably lasted less than an hour, but it revealed everything. It was not really about music. It was about what 20 years of partnership had earned Benjamin Orr, and Ocasek's answer, functionally, was the same thing it had always earned you, a role. Not authorship. Orr took those rejected songs and put them on the lace. The album exists. It is listenable. But it is not what it could have been if the Cars machine, the production, the promotion, the brand, had been behind it. As a solo record without that infrastructure, The Lace reached the audience it could reach. Not the audience those songs might have found. The rejection didn't just cost Orr royalties. It told him, clearly and finally, how Ocasek understood the nature of what they had built together. That knowledge doesn't leave a room when the conversation ends. Heartbeat City, 1984. Number 3 on the Billboard chart, You Might Think, wins Video of the Year at the inaugural MTV Video Music Awards, the ceremony that would define music marketing for the next decade. Drive, sung by Orr and written by Ocasek, becomes the band's most emotionally devastating song. And then Live Aid uses Drive as the soundtrack to footage of the Ethiopian famine. The song reaches an audience of 1.5 billion people across 100 countries. 1.5 billion people, hearing Benjamin Orr's voice, singing Ric Ocasek's song. That single image contains the entire weight of the situation, the voice the world knows. The name on the publishing contract is not that voice's name. The Grammy nominations that follow, album Drive, Producer of the Year, going to one column, not both. Heartbeat City is the peak, and it is, in retrospect, the last moment the foundation holds. What happened next, nobody could have predicted. 1988. The Cars stop. No dramatic announcement, no legal confrontation, no public war the way Oasis fought theirs. Liam and Noel throwing punches in French hotel rooms, the collapse documented in real time for a watching press. The Cars simply ceased. Ocasek moved into production. The others scattered. The point of no return had arrived quietly, in a conversation about songs that didn't fit the architecture. The official moment was 1988, but the real moment was 1986, in whatever room that conversation happened in. Short sentences, heavy weight. The partnership ended, the band split, the machine stopped. Somewhere in those final months, in a studio, in a dressing room, in the specific silence that descends when people who've spent a decade together finally run out of things to say, both men must have understood it was over. Ocasek and Orr had known each other for 20 years. Cleveland to Boston, demo tapes to Grammys. They had built something remarkable and then watched it become the cage neither could escape. The meeting that ended everything was not one meeting. It was 100 smaller ones, each one a version of the same unresolved argument, each one leaving the core question more calcified than before. Then came the final silence, and it was permanent. Ocasek walked away and thrived. As a producer, the control that had made him difficult to share a band with made him extraordinary in the studio. Weezer's Blue album, Bad Brains, no doubt. He became one of the most sought-after producers of the next 2 decades. The same ear pointed in a direction where the authority was the job description. The Cars simply stopped. No farewell tour, no closing statement, just absence. The kind that fills up slowly until one day you realize the band you used to follow has been gone for years, and there was no single moment you could point to as the end. But that wasn't the end. In 2000, Benjamin Orr died, pancreatic cancer. He was 53. The conversation that had never been finished between him and Ocasek, about credit, contribution, about what 2 decades of partnership was worth, stayed unfinished, permanently. The wound that might have been addressed became a wound that could only be carried. What happened next? The audience needed to know. Path A. Ocasek. Ric Ocasek built a second career that rivaled his first. Producer credits on some of the defining alternative rock records of the 1990s. A marriage to Paulina Poroskova that lasted decades. A life in New York that looked, from the outside, settled and productive. But the question he and Orr had left open was now permanently closed on Orr's side. Ocasek could address it only in the direction of absence. Path B. Orr. The Lace, 1986. Underperformed. Without the Cars machine behind him, Orr's commercial reach was limited. The same pattern that hit so many band vocalists who discovered that their fame was inseparable from the group. Think of Roger Daltrey's solo work, creditable but never approaching the Who's commercial ceiling, or Glenn Frey post-Eagles, respected, working, not the same. Orr remained a beloved figure among fans who understood exactly what his voice had given the catalog. And then he was gone. In 2000. Before the reunion. Before the Hall of Fame. Before Ocasek made the call. The voice that sang Drive to 1.5 billion people did not live to hear itself inducted. 2010. Ocasek contacts the surviving members. They made Move Like This, 2011. The first Cars album in 23 years. Ocasek sings the songs that Orr had always sung. He sings Drive. He sings the catalog in the voice of the man he'd turned down 25 years earlier. Every performance of Drive after 2000 is simultaneously tribute and reckoning. 2018, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction. Ocasek, Easton, Hawks, Robinson, and the memory of Orr take their place. 2019, Ocasek dies in his New York apartment. He is 75. David Robinson says afterward that another Cars record ended with Ocasek's death. They would never make one without him. Read that again slowly. The band that broke apart because Ocasek controlled everything became impossible to continue without him. The architect and the prison were the same building. So who was right? Ocasek was right that his control made the band what it was. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame says it plainly. The Cars redefined existing categories. That result doesn't come from committee decisions. It comes from someone holding the wheel with enough conviction to drive somewhere nobody had been. Orr was right that the system was unsustainable. You cannot ask a generational talent to permanently accept the role of instrument in someone else's vision without that eventually breaking something fundamental. They were both right. And that is the most painful kind of conflict. Not the one where someone is clearly wrong, but the one where two valid truths are simply incompatible with each other. The question was never who was more talented. It was whether brilliance and fairness can occupy the same structure at the same time. They usually can't. There is no clean ending here. The 2011 reunion was real. Move Like This was a genuine effort. The Hall of Fame induction was deserved. But the reunion that actually needed to happen, the one between Ocasek and Orr, the one that might have addressed what the 1986 rejection broke, never came. Death made it impossible before either man had the chance. Ocasek sang Drive in 2011 and again in 2018. He sang it in Orr's register, in Orr's emotional key, using words he had written for Orr to deliver. The song still works. That is almost the saddest thing about this story. The music outlasted the relationship that made it, and it kept outlasting everything, and it will keep playing long after everyone involved is gone. Some things you can reconstruct, some things you can only mourn. This story is not about a band. It is about what happens when the system that creates excellence is the same system that destroys the people inside it. Brian Wilson controlled the Beach Boys and made Pet Sounds, one of the greatest albums in American music. The same control produced a decade of psychological crisis for everyone around him, and eventually for Wilson himself. Syd Barrett's singular vision made early Pink Floyd electrifying, and his departure created the space for Dark Side of the Moon, which might never have existed under his leadership. Phil Spector built a wall of sound that no one else could replicate, and the control that produced it destroyed every professional relationship he ever had. The pattern is consistent. The genius and the damage come from the same place. You cannot surgically remove the controlling tendency and leave extraordinary results. They are the same operation, running simultaneously. Ocasek's control was not a correctable flaw. It was the condition of the music being as good as it was. Remove it, and you get a more democratic band, possibly a happier one, almost certainly a less distinctive one. The bill for that distinctiveness was paid by the people who performed it without writing it. The story was never really about control. It was about the price of genius, and the fact that someone always pays it, and it's almost never the genius. In the beginning, two young men from the Midwest moved to Boston together and built a sound nobody had heard before. One wrote the songs, one sang them. For a decade, that division produced some of the most distinctive music of its era. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame agreed. History agreed. The songs themselves, still playing, still finding new listeners, agreed. But the division that made the music great made the partnership impossible to sustain. And when it broke the way long partnerships break. Not with a clean snap, but with a slow pulling apart that leaves both people diminished in ways success can't repair. In 2011, Ocasek called the survivors back. He sang all the songs, including the ones that had never been his to sing, the ones written for a voice no longer available. In the end, they almost made it back to the same room. Almost. The architect rebuilt the structure. He just couldn't rebuild the person who had made the structure feel alive. And somewhere at the center of all of it, the hits, the Grammy nominations, the Hall of Fame induction, the reunion that came too late, is a conversation that lasted less than an hour, in which one man told another man that his songs weren't good enough. What Orr heard that day wasn't a production note, it was a verdict. And verdicts, once delivered, outlast everything, even the music. What's your memory of the Cars? Was Drive the one that got you, or just what I needed? And do you think Ocasek was right, or did he ask too much from the man standing next to him every night? Drop it in the comments. I read every one. Like and subscribe for more stories from rock history, the partnerships that built legends, and the fractures that proved brilliance and fairness rarely share the same room.